So today I'm going to be presenting on virtual field trips during a pandemic, applications of virtual outcrop, lessons learned and future use. This is research from my postdoc, which has been going on for the last 9 months and makes a bit of a difference from my typical VMSG PhD presentations, which were on the Isle of Mull lava flow stratigraphy. So I'm going to give you kind of context of these virtual field trips that we've been leading at the University of Aberdeen, case studies of these virtual field trips, kind of questionnaires that we ran that were ethically approved after each field trip, and kind of conclusions that led from those. Prior to the pandemic, traditional fieldwork formed a key component of many geology and volcanology programmes across the globe. However, COVID-19 resulted in kind of restrictions in social interaction and travel, which resulted in much teaching, including field trips, to be moved online in some sort of virtual format. And it goes without saying that in the absence of active volcanism in the UK, travel restrictions really did hit the community of VMSG hard, both in terms of research but also in teaching. Without being able to visit such localities of active volcanism, online alternatives had to be found, and many of you that I'm speaking to now will have used such tools as Google Earth in addition to many others in order to teach students kind of your research and different attributes and different parts of active volcanic settings. And at the University of Aberdeen, we also had to find several kind of direct replacements for field trips that occurred locally and globally looking at different geological settings. And this included the field trips that I'm going to be talking about today. And these were kind of delivered to master's level students. They were kind of tutor led in real time, 9 to 5, very similar to what I showed in the virtual field trip last year for VMSG, where I talked through a series of localities and you were able to look at the same localities online. We had kind of 2 field trips I'm going to be talking about, which are Utah, which is 10 days long, and a Pyrenees field trip, which is about 5 days long. These field trips have been running for many, many years, so the staff kind of had prior experience in the localities as well as virtual outcrop geology, such as V3Geo and Lime, the software we ran the field trips in. We also use Google Earth for the days with insufficient virtual outcrop, as well as kind of areas where we're looking at massive, large scale, kind of regional scale geology. So I mentioned the staff's prior experience to V3Geo. If you don't know what V3Geo is, it's an online repository for 3D models across geoscience. There's about 250 models on there at the moment, and there's about 51 that are relevant to volcanic and magmatic systems. If you have your own 3D models and you would like to upload them to V3Geo, there is an ability to contribute to the platform and upload your own models for teaching and your own research if you wish. Okay, so I mentioned that we had a series of questionnaires that we ran to the students after each virtual field trip. They were anonymous and they asked students to kind of rate between 1 and 5 a series of questions. 1 would be disagree and 5 would be agree. The Utah 2020 group were the year group that had COVID hit halfway through, so they only had the virtual field trip of Utah. The next year group had both field trips virtually, being Pyrenees 2020 and Utah 2021. We asked the students whether or not they had learnt something over the course of the field trip, and most students agreed with that. We then asked a series of questions on trip timing and delivery, such as whether or not the students liked having the field trip at a fixed time, such as 9 to 5, 5 days a week. And most students seemed to agree that they enjoyed having this fixed time. And this was meant to emulate a traditional field trip. And then we asked them whether or not working in groups was better than working independently. Most students again seemed to agree. There's a larger range in the Pyrenees 2020 group. And we attributed that to the students being at the very start of their academic year. They don't necessarily have the kind of social cohesion and friendship groups that they may have had it been later on in their academic year. So in terms of software content and IT, overall most students agreed that the IT solutions worked for them. We had one member of staff there to actually do one-on-ones with any individual who had issues with any of the IT solutions or had issues sharing their screen or anything with the software Lime that we were using. In terms of understanding how to use Google Earth for geology, most students agreed. Many of them had prior experience to using Google Earth. And in terms of Lime, the platform we use, the software we use to run the virtual field trips, again, most of them agreed that it was a good tool for that, and actually improved notably for the group that used it initially in the Pyrenees, but then went on to use it for their Utah field trip. You can kind of see there's an improvement there. In terms of enjoying using Lime, again, most of them did actually agree that they did enjoy using Lime, and that was quite consistent across all the virtual field trips. In terms of virtual field trips versus normal field trips, many students agreed that they did learn something on these virtual field trips that they may not have on a normal field trip, although there is a bit of a scatter there. Looking at the virtual field trips and whether or not they're better than normal field trips, well, many students disagreed. Although this is not surprising, you can actually see that there is quite a broad scatter, which is quite an interesting point. And then looking at whether or not the students would rather be in Utah or the Pyrenees, as in the field, most students did agree that they would rather be there. And I think most staff would have agreed that they'd rather be in the field. So it's not too surprising there either. What was very surprising was the course evaluation forms. These are run by every department across the university for every course, including questions such as the effectiveness of teaching, the enjoyment of the course, and whether or not the course is perceived to improve their graduate attributes and employability of the students. We had the data from prior to the pandemic, which is highlighted in navy, and then we had the data from the year that was hit halfway through, so they had part in-person and part virtual field trip. And then we also had the year that was entirely during the pandemic, so entirely virtual. And you can note that there is an improvement in the perceptions of the students across every one of these questions, which was something we did not expect and was very, very interesting to see. So to summarise the advantages of virtual field trips, there are many. They include the ability to examine a large volume of data across varying scales. They're logistically easier to plan as they're not geographically confined. They can go in a logical order. They are financially inclusive, time efficient. There's no time spent in a van travelling from location to location. They have lower carbon emissions. They're inclusive to those with restricted physical access. They're time flexible, especially if they're recorded. And they allow individuals to work at their own speed. In terms of disadvantages, there are also a few to mention. There is a loss of social cohesion amongst groups, especially those that don't already have pre-existing friendships. There's a loss of travel and outdoor experience, and then there's also a loss of traditional field training. And of course, there are IT issues for some. So there are some disadvantages to virtual field trips. However, we suggest that many would be mitigated through blended learning, through the implementation of courses which run both virtually and in-person traditional field trips blended together. So thank you for listening to my talk today. I hope you see the value of virtual field trips going forward beyond the pandemic, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.